31 Tiger tanks in 3 nights, and by the end of it, a supply corridor meant to feed an armored thrust had become a graveyard of stalled steel. That was the line that reached headquarters before sunrise. By noon, men who had never seen the road were arguing over it with pencils and ash on their sleeves. 31 Tigers. Heavy armor built to crush roads and nerves. And the report made even less sense. No concentrated artillery, no airstrike, no confirmed minefield, no formed anti-tank unit identified. The road mattered because maps made it matter. A narrow timber and dirt corridor cut through wet forest and peat flats in occupied Poland, linking rail unload points to a forward staging zone where fuel and shells were already late. If the corridor jammed, the spearhead ahead would idle. If it idled, counterfire would catch it in place. Hours mattered. What did not fit the logic of the reports was the sound. The first crew to radio in did not describe explosions. They described hammering, single strikes, metal on metal, somewhere in fog beside the track, then behind them, then ahead again, as if the forest itself were working iron in the dark. And before anyone explained anything, the lead tiger stopped because a track pin retaining wedge was simply missing. 6 hours earlier, in a village that no longer appeared on some maps, Pyotr Kraviet held a blacksmith's hammer in both hands and listened to rain drip through a damaged roof. He was not a soldier by trade. He shod horses, repaired plow teeth, straightened axles, and made hinges that outlasted marriages. Broad shoulders, burned knuckles, quiet voice. He rubbed the notch in the hammer's worn ash handle with his thumb whenever he was thinking. "Steel remembers," he said. Lieutenant Janina Robel stood across a bench with a map weighted by nails. Yanka led a small home army cell and wore discipline plainly, because weather demanded it. She traced the forest corridor with one fingernail. "We don't need heroics," she said. "We need delay, 72 hours of confusion, time." Beside her, Antek Reel, a former forestry surveyor with a jaw like split oak, leaned over the map. He rolled a pine needle between his fingers while thinking. "Listen to the ground," he murmured. "Road sits on old corduroy timber here, culvert here, bog on both sides, heavy steel forced to stay polite." At the far end of the room, 19-year-old Marek Sowa checked the same radio batteries by lantern light. Too thin for his coat, eyes too alert. When fear climbed into his throat, he counted under it. 4 in, 4 out. The mission came from a courier soaked to the elbows. A heavy armored transfer would move in segments over 3 nights, using the forest route to avoid aircraft on open roads. Numbers uncertain, escort strength unknown. The only certainty was the deadline. If the route stayed usable, armor would reach the line in time for a planned push. If the route became unreliable, schedules far above their heads would slip. Yanka looked at Pyotr. "You said you had a plan that uses what we actually have." Pyotr set the hammer down and laid out the rest. Bolts scavenged from farm machinery, chain links, chisels, wedges, wire, hand drills, lantern glass, horse bells wrapped in cloth, and sacks of cut hardwood plugs. Marek frowned. "This delays tigers?" Pyotr nodded once. "Not by fighting them where they are strong." He pointed to the map. "We make them stop themselves." "How do 4 people and 2 helpers even touch a tiger column without being seen?" Antek answered. "Night rain, fog over peat, engine noise masking movement, timber road forcing single-file pace, few places to turn. If they inspect the road, won't they simply clear sabotage and continue?" Pyotr tapped the hammer handle once against the bench. "Then we don't give them one thing to clear. We give them doubt at every halt." Janka listened while he reduced the plan to 3 aims. Create stoppages that look accidental, multiply sounds without exposing shooters, and force command to decide on incomplete reports. He did not call it psychological warfare. He called it working a stubborn rivet. Through the afternoon and into dusk they worked in a barn lit by shielded lamps. Pyotr used the hammer as an instrument, peening steel wedges thinner, setting chain hooks, knocking distorted bolts into shapes that fit old timber seams. Marek copied him and struck too hard. Pyotr took the hammer back, reset his grip, and said, "Let the weight do the work." Outside, villagers moved livestock and carts as if preparing to flee shelling. A woman with flour on her sleeves brought boiled potatoes and told Yanka, "If you fail, fail late." At twilight, Yanka split the team. She would coordinate from a hidden relay point with Marek on the portable set. Antek and Pyotr would move along the timber corridor with two local brothers who knew drainage ditches like rooms in their own house. Their job was not to destroy 31 tanks. It was to bend the road's rhythm until men inside those machines stopped trusting what they heard, what they saw, and then what they were told. In a command post 20 kilometers away, Major Klaus Ritter received the movement schedule with visible boredom. He aligned the map corners before reading, his small ritual. "Facts, not ghosts," he said when an adjutant mentioned partisans. "Convoys fear stories when roads are bad." Still, Ritter circled the forest corridor and underlined the culvert crossing near a place listed on one map and absent on another, not because he feared an ambush, because he disliked uncertainty in paperwork. By full dark, fog lay low between tree trunks, and the timber road shone black with rain. Pyotr crouched beside the first prepared seam in the corduroy trackway, the hammer tucked under his coat against any glint. Antek pressed his ear to the ground and lifted 2 fingers. Far off, engines. Marek's whisper crackled from Yanka's relay point. "Column moving, lead elements earlier than expected." Pyotr rubbed the notch in the hammer handle with his thumb. The first impossible disruption was about to begin. The lead tiger stopped with no explosion, no fireball, and no visible attacker. Its left track sagged first, then locked at an angle as the driver tried to correct on the slick timber road. The machine lurched, idled, and sat there steaming in rain while the tank behind it braked too late and bumped its rear plate hard enough to shake curses across the radio net. Men opened hatches into fog and flashlight beams. They expected a crater. They found wet wood, a missing retaining wedge, and one track pin walking out of alignment under the strain of turning weight. "A mechanical fault," the lead sergeant reported. Irritated voices answered, "Clear it. Move." Then the hammering started. One strike to the right of the road, sharp, close. The turret swung. Nothing. Another strike behind the third vehicle, metallic and hollow, as if someone had hit a suspended rail, then 2 quick strikes ahead, farther off. A loader fired a burst from a machine gun into brush. Another tank joined him. Muzzle flashes strobed trunks, steam, and rain, and the forest gave back only shredded bark and echo. From the ditch 30 meters away, Pyotr did not move. He lay flat beneath cut reeds and a soaked tarp, listening to wasted ammunition chew the dark. Beside him, Antek touched his sleeve once. Stay. The first decoy line had worked. A length of wire, a hidden hook, a hanging scrap of steel under a culvert beam, and Pyotr's hammer pulled and struck from a different angle than the crews expected. Sound in fog was not sight. It was bait. At the relay point, Yanka kept her voice low into Marek's headset. "Do not report success. Report behavior." Marek swallowed. They fired blind. Again. 3 vehicles halted, column compressed. He nodded as if she could see him, then whispered under his breath, 4 in, 4 out. Question. Would the crews settle once engineers checked the track and restored movement? They almost did. The pinned track was reset. The damaged wedge was replaced from spares. The lead tiger rolled forward again, slower this time, escorts dismounted and walking the verges. For 8 minutes the column moved in hard discipline, no firing, no voices over open channels except distances and speed. Then a second stoppage hit 3 vehicles back, not a blast. A crack of timber under concentrated weight where Pyotr had worked earlier, driving shaped hardwood plugs and loosened spikes into old corduroy seams so that the road would hold until it did not. The tiger dropped one side just enough to twist the track under torque. Not a dramatic sink. Worse. A partial failure that looked like bad road and bad luck. Coincidence, one officer snapped over radio. Coincidence, another repeated, because he wanted it to be. In Major Ritter's command room, the first report arrived filtered through annoyance. Minor delay, poor road condition, undisciplined firing by escorts reacting to acoustic deception, origin unknown. Ritter did not even look up at the phrase acoustic deception. "Unknown enemy means no enemy seen," he said. "They are frightening themselves." His adjutant allowed himself a smile. Someone at the back muttered, "Partisans with hammers now." Laughter lasted less than a minute. The second report came in from a different segment of the same movement window, farther down the corridor where another group had entered on schedule and encountered a similar pattern. Unexplained halts, metallic strikes in fog from shifting directions, escorts firing into empty tree lines, and one vehicle throwing a track after a brief road edge inspection forced a turn on soaked timber. Ritter read that one twice. "What exactly is being hit?" he asked. "Unclear, Herr Major." "Who has eyes on the attackers?" "Negative." He aligned the map corners again, slower now. "Facts, not ghosts," he said, but the sentence landed flat. On the road, irritation became doubt because doubt sounds like argument. Engineers wanted light. Tank commanders wanted movement. Escort infantry wanted the armor to stop rotating turrets every time a sound came from the mist. Someone reported footsteps in water to the left. Someone else reported a lantern to the right. A third swore he heard hammering from inside a disabled vehicle. The radios thickened with overlapping voices and clipped corrections. Piotr and Antek kept their rules strict. Never repeat a sound from the same place, never move on a firing burst, and never let a decoy run longer than 3 strikes. The hammer did almost no damage by itself. That was the point. Its sound made men spend fear in the wrong direction, while road flaws, weight, and impatience did the real work. At one halt, Piotr crawled under a timber lip slick with mud and used the hammer in silence, wrapped head, to seat a wedge into a prepared gap under an outer plank. 3 muted taps. He froze as boots splashed above him. German voices. A flashlight beam slashed the ditch and passed over reeds inches from his face. Antek, farther back, gave their signal by pinching a dry twig until it clicked once. The beam moved on. Question: how long could they keep this up before someone stopped reacting and simply bulldozed through? The answer came from the crews themselves. Fatigue was starting early because none of them could tell which events belonged together. Mechanical issue, bad road, sabotage, nerves, rain, fire discipline violations, radio confusion. Each explanation weakened the others. Janka heard it in the traffic. "They don't have one story," she told Marek. "Keep listening for who takes control." Marek flinched at a distant burst and adjusted the antenna. "Same officer keeps demanding bearings, others keep giving sounds." "Name?" He listened. "Ritter, they mention him." By the time Major Ritter ordered a disciplined sweep ahead of the next segment, his tone had shifted from bored to precise, then from precise to brittle. He requested engineers, additional infantry screens, and permission to stagger the movement intervals. Headquarters above him asked whether he was reporting enemy strength or weather. Ritter answered, "I am reporting loss of reliable movement." The response came back after a pause long enough to humiliate him. "Continue transfer, increase escorts, no reroute authorized." The corridor had to hold. Timetables elsewhere depended on it. So Ritter made the decision that would feed the trap. He ordered reinforcements into the forest corridor before dawn, with wider sweeps on both flanks and stricter pressure to keep the armor moving between inspections. In the ditch, Janka's relay crackled to Piotr through Marek's voice. "They're adding men." Piotr looked once at the dark tree line, then at the hammer in his hand. "Good," he said. "More ears." By the second night, nobody in the corridor trusted silence. That was the real escalation, not damage, not even delay. Silence itself had become suspicious, and once that happens in a moving column, discipline starts paying interest on every mistake. A sentry heard nothing for 20 minutes and fired because he was certain that meant they were being watched. Another convoy segment halted because a driver swore the road felt hollow under his track, and when engineers checked, they found nothing but soaked timbers and old rot. A loader sliced his palm reseating a hatch in panic after someone struck metal twice in the fog and then never struck again. One escort squad emptied magazines at a lantern glow that turned out to be reflected muzzle flash caught in wet branches. No grand disasters, small fractures, the kind that turn procedure into superstition. From Janka's relay point, the radio net sounded less like command and more like a market argument dragged through static. "Repeat location." "Negative, say again. Too much interference." "Who fired?" "Not us." "Report road status." "Road status depends where you mean." Marek's fingers shook on the tuning dial. He forced them still against his knee. 4 in, 4 out. Then to Yanka. They're stepping on each other. Same channels, different columns. Good for us, she said, though her eyes were fixed on the map and she did not sound pleased. Bad for timing. That was the new question. Could they still delay the armor long enough now that the enemy had increased escorts and inspections? Their tricks were working, but working too well in one way. The corridor was filling with more men, more light, more random fire, and more chances to be seen. Pyotr solved that by reducing noise and increasing certainty only where it mattered. Steel remembers, he told Antek in a ditch while rain ticked on leaves. So do officers. If we keep scratching everywhere, they slow everywhere and learn everywhere. We need one place they cannot solve fast. Antek rolled a pine needle and nodded toward the map oilskin between them. Culvert bend, narrow shoulders, soft approach, hard turn if they panic. They had discussed the culvert since the first night, but held it back while the corridor was still fragile from confusion. Now it would become the center of the operation. Not an explosion trap, not an impossible movie collapse, but a mechanically ugly choke point built from weight, timing, wet timber, and the habit of heavy vehicles bunching when impatient men demand speed. Before they moved, Yanka made Pyotr explain the plan cleanly to Marek, who would have to relay cues without seeing the road. Pyotr kept it under a minute. 3 steps. First, force a stop before the culvert so they compress. Second, pull the lead forward again with false clearance and sounds behind them so they enter one by one under pressure. Third, when the heaviest vehicles are committed, shift the road edge and drainage boards at the bend so turning correction becomes track strain. No blast, just bad geometry at the worst moment. Marek stared at him. And the hammer? Pyotr lifted it slightly. Sets the road, calls the ears, releases the chain. They moved before dawn to prepare the bend. Antek led through drainage cuts and alder scrub, never using the same footpath twice. Listen to the ground, he whispered, each time Marek stumbled on roots while carrying wire and wrapped metal scraps. The corridor felt different here. The road rose onto timber over black water, crossed a culvert, then bent left between 2 fir-stands where vehicles could not see far and could not swing wide without risking the verge. Pyotr worked by touch more than light. Wrapped hammer strikes, wedges under outer planks, pins eased, not removed, a chain hidden under brush and through bored holes, connected to a line they could pull from the ditch to shift pre-weakened edge support at the exact moment of turning load. It would not drop a tank into a pit. It would change how the road carried weight, while crews were already tense and overcorrecting. Question, would increased engineering checks catch it? Possibly. So they prepared misdirection around the bend as well. 2 false temper points easy to find, obvious enough to clear, designed to make inspectors feel useful and move on. At midday, Major Ritter visited the forward control point near the corridor himself. Mud on boots now, no smile. He listened to 3 separate officers describe the previous night and heard 3 different wars. One blamed poor maintenance and wet timber. One blamed partisans moving in squad strength. One blamed his own infantry for shooting at echoes. Ritter asked the same question each time. How many enemies seen? The answers stayed vague. Shadows. Movement. Possibly 1 man. That offended him more than losses. Machines could fail. Roads could fail. But reports without a target felt like insubordination disguised as confusion. He called higher command and requested full reroute authority for the remaining heavy elements. The reply was colder than before. No. The forward timetable was slipping. Fuel trains were misaligned. Weather windows were closing. Keep the corridor open and keep the transfer moving. He heard paper shuffling on the other end before the final sentence. Do not report phantoms again. Ritter set the handset down so carefully it made his adjutant step back. By evening, pressure filtered down as pressure always does, into shorter tempers, faster orders, and less patience for checks that took time but saved lives. Column spacing tightened. Escort patrols were pushed farther into the woods but recalled sooner to preserve movement. Engineers marked hazards quickly and were told to stop hunting stories. In Yanka's relay hollow, Marek listened and looked pale. They're angry now. Angry men move predictably, Yanka said. Then, after a beat, terrified men do not. Which are these? A burst of static answered for him, Then a clipped voice demanding immediate clearance at the culvert bend. "Both," Marek whispered. Rain thickened after dark. Fog came in low, then lower, flattening distance. Pyotr and Antek took positions on opposite sides of the bend, with the local brothers on the pull line. Yanka stayed back with Marek, ready to relay timing from radio patterns. No speeches, no handshakes. Pyotr only checked the hammerhead once with his thumb, feeling for looseness that was not there. Engines approached in staggered pulses through the trees. A forward escort announced the culvert clear. Then someone farther back screamed over radio that hammering was coming from the rear of the column. Turrets rotated, orders crossed, brakes hissed. At the bend, the first Tiger started onto the culvert. The first Tiger crossed the culvert slowly, almost perfectly. That was the dangerous part of Pyotr's plan. If the lead vehicle crawled through with full caution and no pressure from behind, the bend might hold long enough for all of them to pass. Everything depended on the column behaving like a column under stress, compressing, accelerating, correcting, and transmitting fear forward by radio faster than road conditions could be understood. Janka heard the behavior shift before she saw any signal flare through the trees. "Move, move, move," one officer shouted on the net. Another voice cut in. "Rear reports contact sounds, unknown strength." Ritter's voice, sharp now, not bored at all. "Maintain interval. Confirm with eyes." Nobody confirmed with eyes. They confirmed with noise. Pyotr struck once under the culvert beam, a bright iron note the fog threw backward. One of the local brothers yanked the decoy wire farther upslope. A second metallic strike answered from behind the third vehicle. Machine gun fire erupted in two directions at once. The lead Tiger, already at the bend, increased throttle to clear what its commander assumed was a threatened choke point. That extra force mattered. Its right track climbed the inner plank seam at the turn. The driver corrected left. The outer edge support, pre-weakened and waterlogged, took the load for a heartbeat, then shifted when Antek and the brothers pulled the buried chain line. Not a collapse, a sag and roll, enough to tilt the outer track, spike the suspension strain, and force another correction on slick timber. The Tiger did not overturn. It jammed cross-angle, nose forward, rear obstructing the lane. Behind it, the second vehicle braked hard, slewed slightly, and cracked more of the softened edge boards. Engineers ran in with lamps and were screamed back as a turret traversed toward fresh hammer strikes in the mist. Someone yelled ambush. Someone else yelled no target. A third voice demanded smoke. Smoke in wet fog turned the bend into a wall. Question: would they recover quickly with engineers and tow lines? They might have, if the road behind had stayed orderly. Instead, compressed weight and confused orders created the set piece Pyotr wanted and feared. A third Tiger halted half on old corduroy planks where hidden wedges had shifted under repeated load. Its driver tried a small correction to maintain spacing. The track bit, slipped, and threw tension into a pin already working loose from vibration and earlier road strain. The crew heard the wrong sound at the wrong moment. Hammering again, close this time, just off the left shoulder, and fired point blank into older brush. The recoil rocked the vehicle on compromised timber. Engineers dropped their tools and hit mud. Now the corridor was blocked at 2 points within shouting distance, in darkness, in smoke, on wet timber, with no confirmed enemy in sight. From his forward control point, Major Ritter demanded a clean picture. He got fragments. Lead vehicle jammed at bend. Second immobile pending clearance. Possible sabotage of road support. Receiving fire? From where? Unknown. Stop saying unknown. He arrived in person within the hour, rain on his coat collar, face pale with rage and fatigue. Lamps were hooded, engines idled like chained animals. He walked the safer stretch up to the engineer cordon and stared at the bent lane, the tilted planks, the churned mud, the crews shouting bearings into fog as if direction could be bullied into clarity. Facts, not ghosts, he said again, but this time he said it to himself. An engineer captain, hands shaking with cold, pointed at the culvert edge. Tampering, yes, but not enough for this unless they timed the load and forced overcorrection. They know where to push. How many men? The engineer hesitated. Few. Ritter turned on him. Few men do not stop tigers. The engineer looked at the road, not at Ritter. Tonight they did. While command fixated on the bend, Pyotr's group paid its price on the flank. One local brother, Tomasz, slipped while relocating the pull line and cracked his ankle in a drainage ditch. He bit his sleeve instead of crying out as escort boots splashed within meters. Marek, relaying from Janka's position, nearly transmitted over an open interval when he heard a German squad closing from the north side. Janka clamped his wrist, waited 2 beats, then whispered the reroute phrase into the set at the exact moment a burst of static covered it. Pyotr and Antek moved Tomasz by dragging him on a reed mat through black water that reached their waists. No heroics, no dramatic last stands, just cold, weight, and silence. Pyotr lost the wrapped decoy steel in the ditch and nearly went back for it before Antek hissed, "Listen to the ground." Boots. Dogs? No, not yet. Just men. At the bend, crews finally secured tow cables and attempted to pull the lead tiger straighter. The cable snapped on the first heavy strain, lashing mud and sparks. Nobody was killed, but the shock finished morale where the fog had started. A loader laughed once, high, wrong, involuntary, and could not stop. Another crew refused to dismount for road work without infantry screens doubled on both verges. Ritter's adjutant handed him a fresh message from higher command. Delays now affecting fuel distribution to the forward line. Explanation required by dawn. Not requested, required. Ritter read it, folded it, and looked toward the trees where no enemy appeared. Humiliation sharpened him more than fear ever would. If he could not clear the corridor immediately, he would change the mission. He ordered the remaining heavy vehicles halted outside the forest, lighter traffic rerouted, and the entire sector around the corridor swept at first light by infantry, engineers, and trackers. No more reactive movement. No more arguing with shadows. Find the saboteurs. Capture one alive if possible. In the relay hollow, Marek heard the order and looked at Janka as if the air itself had narrowed. "They're hunting," he said. Janka took the handset, listening to Ritter's clipped directives spread through the net like knives being laid out on a table. Then she turned toward the dark where Pyotr and Antek were dragging Tomasz through flooded brush. The corridor timetable had broken, and now the forest was about to close. Dawn did not clear the forest. It made the hunt worse. Fog lifted in strips, leaving bright gaps and blind pockets, the kind of light that convinces men they can finally see while hiding everything that matters between tree trunks. Ritter's sweep units entered from 3 sides with engineers, dogs, and local auxiliaries who knew some paths and distrusted all of them. Orders were explicit: recover tools, identify tamper points, seize suspects, and stop the corridor from becoming a story. That last part was never written, but everyone heard it. The hunt was ruthless in the way institutional panic always is, systematic, tired, and angry. Cabins were searched, barn floors were probed, wheel tracks were measured. Men with wet boots were lined against walls and questioned about sounds in the night as if sound had a nationality. Engineers marked tampered planks with chalk and argued whether the damage was clever sabotage or cumulative stress exploited by timing. Ritter wanted names. The road offered mechanics. Question: could Pyotr's group move an injured man through a tightening grid before dogs found the ditch line? Only if they followed rules stricter than courage. Janka set them before sunrise in a drainage hollow while Tomasz shivered under a blanket and bit down on leather. No straight paths, no talking above a whisper, no crossing open water if reeds can hide you. If separated, do not search for each other. Reach fallback and wait. Marek looked sick and nodded anyway. 4 in, 4 out. Pyotr checked Tomasz's splint, then rubbed the hammer handle notch with his thumb. He had carried the hammer through rain, mud, and black water, and now it looked less like a tool than a piece of the night itself. "Steel remembers," he said quietly. "So will dogs. We give them too many memories." Antek led the first movement along an old peat cut invisible, unless you knew why birch roots bent that way. "Listen to the ground," he whispered every time someone drifted toward fir needles that would hold a print. They moved in short bursts, then froze for long stretches, while sweep lines passed close enough for them to hear canteens knock against buttons. Near midday, the dogs found one of the false tamper sites Pyotr had prepared and erupted in barking at a culvert scrap and buried wire. Search teams flooded the wrong side of the corridor for nearly an hour, certain they were closing on a workshop hidden in alder swamp. Ritter himself redirected units there after a junior officer reported extensive equipment discovered. The extensive equipment turned out to be decoy metal, 2 wrapped bells, and a broken lantern hook. Ritter's face changed when he saw it. Not fear, not anger, something worse. Recognition. He was being manipulated in real time by people who understood what his men would report. Facts, not ghosts, he said, but his voice was hoarse now. He ordered all findings documented and all rumors suppressed on the net. Mechanical language only. No more phantom blacksmith, no more forest hammer, no more speculation in open channels. The phrases had started spreading among crews, and he understood what that meant. The enemy had already entered the unit's vocabulary. That order filtered down and created a different kind of confusion. Men still heard hammering in memory whenever metal rang against metal, but now they described it as incidental contact. Crews who had fired into empty fog reported sound misidentification. A loader who swore he saw a man under a culvert with a hammer tucked under his arm withdrew the statement when asked a second time by a staff officer taking notes. Late afternoon brought the near capture. Piotr, Antek, Marek, and Tomasz were crossing a shallow logging cut when a sweep element angled in faster than expected from the east. Not random. Good work. Someone had read the ground correctly. Antek froze, pine needle between his teeth, then pointed them into a collapsed charcoal pit lined with wet brush. Barely deep enough. Barely wide enough. Tomasz nearly groaned as they lowered him in. Piotr covered the hammer head with his cap to stop any accidental shine. Boots came within arm's reach. A dog pulled hard on the leash, whining at the pit edge. Marek's breath began to stutter. Yanka, somewhere downslope and out of sight, did the only thing she could do. She triggered a decoy she had saved for exactly this, wire on a hidden hanging plate, 200 meters off to the north. 3 strikes. Sharp. Clean. Impossible to ignore if you believed the story already crawling through your units. The dog's head snapped toward the sound. The handler cursed and dragged it sideways. 2 soldiers ran. One shouted, "There! Again!" The sweep line flexed. For 20 seconds no one looked at the pit. Marek pressed his fist into his mouth until the voices moved off. When they were gone, Piotr realized his own hand was clenched around the hammer hard enough to hurt. By nightfall, Yanka got them to a farmhouse cellar beyond the sweep ring. Tomasz's ankle was swollen badly but stable. Marek sat against a wall, mud to the chest, and stared at nothing. He was still counting breath, but now there were long gaps between the numbers. "You did well," Yanka told him. "I heard them deciding," he said without looking up. "Deciding what? Whether the sound was us or fear." In the next 48 hours, the corridor remained restricted for heavy transfers. Some Tigers were recovered and moved later by daylight under heavier engineering control. Some reports suggest several damaged vehicles were cannibalized for parts on site before the route was fully restored. Accounts conflict on exact numbers by category. What did not conflict was the effect. The schedule broke, and higher command demanded a cleaner explanation than a few partisans with terrain knowledge and a hammer. So the explanation was made cleaner. Road failure due to weather and timber degradation, aggravated by hurried movement discipline and poor interval control under limited visibility. Isolated sabotage contributing factor. Enemy strength indeterminate. Psychological rumors to be disregarded. Ritter signed versions of that summary because he needed the corridor back in the language of logistics, not humiliation. On the Polish side, recognition came in whispers and handshakes in kitchens with blankets over windows. Then came the harder order from their own network. No boasting, no public claims, no names tied to the corridor operation. Operational security, yes, but also survival. Villages were being searched. Witnesses were already being questioned. Stories got people killed long after the shooting stopped. Yanka repeated the order herself. You tell no one the shape of it, not the culvert, not the chain, not the sound. Piotr nodded and set the hammer on the cellar table between them. Marek looked at it as if it were a radio that had gone silent forever. Within weeks, couriers were reassigned, helpers scattered, and the men who had heard the clearest versions of those nights were moved, arrested, drafted, displaced, or buried by other events. By the time the road dried, the story was already vanishing. Records were sealed, witnesses were scattered, and the hammer became just another tool again. Years later, people tried to reconstruct those 3 nights, as if the truth were still waiting intact inside the paperwork. It was not. What survives cleanly are the things institutions are good at preserving: movement schedules, fuel shortages, weather summaries, engineering requisitions, replacement requests for track components, disciplinary notes about radio procedure, and complaints about road conditions in wet forest sectors. What survives badly are the things men heard, feared, denied, and then edited, so their reports would pass upward without turning into accusations. That is why the story divides in 2, depending on where you stand. From the command room side, the corridor incident looks like a convergence of bad weather, degraded corduroy timber, overburdened heavy vehicles, compressed intervals, and poor fire discipline under low visibility. That version is not false. In fact, much of it is plainly true. Heavy machines on wet timber roads fail in ugly, ordinary ways. Tired crews make noise into enemies. Officers under deadline pressure push movement when caution would save time later. Logistics breaks long before legends begin. From the ditch line, the same nights look different. Not supernatural, not heroic in the clean cinematic sense. Just precise human pressure applied at the exact seams where machines, schedules, and nerves share the same weakness. A missing wedge, a shifted plank, a sound in fog from the wrong direction, a command net crowded past clarity. Men inside steel convinced for 1 second that the threat was somewhere else. 1 second repeated enough times becomes a roadblock. Accounts conflict on details. Some say the hammering was heard in patterns, almost like signals. Others insist it was irregular, which may be more plausible under fire and rain. Some remember 1 local brother with Piotr, not 2. Some place Marek at the relay point for the entire operation. 1 later testimony puts him near the bend, though that may be memory borrowing drama from fear. Even the number 31 shifts depending on who is counting disabled, delayed, abandoned, or later recovered vehicles. The title survives because numbers travel better than nuance. The characters, where they can be traced at all, fade in ways that feel more truthful than endings. Piotr Krawiec returned to metalwork between operations whenever he could. Villagers remembered his hands before they remembered his face, burned knuckles, blackened nail beds, the way he tested a tool's balance before speaking. 1 account says he kept the same hammer through the war and after it, but never used it at public commemorations, refusing to let anyone pass it around as a relic. Another says the original hammerhead cracked years later repairing a gate hinge. Both stories fit him. "Steel remembers," people recalled him saying. Nobody agrees whether he meant steel remembers force or men do. Lieutenant Janina Roble remained in underground work longer than most around her wanted. In later recollections, she appears as discipline itself, unromantic, exact, already thinking about what came after a successful action and whom success might endanger. Survivors remembered 1 thing clearly. She did not let them repeat the corridor story while the danger was real. Recognition meant exposure. Silence in that moment was part of the operation. Marek Sowa is the hardest to pin down because youth at war is often recorded only when it breaks. A few scattered memories describe him after the corridor incident as quieter, slower to answer, always listening half a second longer than everyone else before speaking. 1 person remembered him counting under his breath while waiting for bread. Another remembered him refusing to sit near open radios for years. 4 in, 4 out, he reportedly said when panic rose. A private drill turned into a life raft. Antek Reel appears in almost every version because terrain experts are unforgettable once you realize what they were doing all along. Not commanding, not dramatizing. Just reading ground better than men with rank red maps. "Listen to the ground," he told younger fighters and farmers alike. After the war, that phrase was repeated as practical advice, then as folklore, then as if it had always belonged to everyone. Major Klaus Ritter survives mostly in the paper voice of officers under pressure, crisp at first, then increasingly corrective, then defensive in a way that reveals more than confession would. He was not stupid, that matters. He understood eventually that he was facing a small group leveraging terrain and psychology, not a phantom army. But by the time he understood it, the institutional need above him was no longer understanding. It was containment. The corridor had to be returned to logistics language. The crews had to be returned to discipline language. The rumor of a blacksmith with a hammer had to be reduced to acoustic deception and isolated sabotage. And that is the final contradiction. There are even contradictions in the maps used to discuss it later. One copy marks the culvert bend as load limited, another does not. That small difference changes blame, which is exactly why small differences survive when larger truths become dangerous. The official summaries minimize the very factors that explain the event best. Fear is treated as an embarrassing side effect instead of the battlefield condition it became. Yet fear did not replace mechanics, it amplified them. Terrain did not magically defeat armor, it narrowed choices until human error became predictable. Technology did not fail by itself. It was forced to operate at the edge of visibility, on a schedule that punished caution, under leaders who could not report uncertainty without cost. That is the grounded lesson hiding inside the legend. Fear hijacks discipline faster than steel loses strength, and when time, terrain, and psychology line up, even the heaviest machine can be made to fight the road before it fights the enemy. So maybe the story is not that one Polish blacksmith destroyed 31 tigers with an ordinary hammer. Maybe it is worse for the men in the reports, and more interesting for the rest of us. He taught a column of heavy armor to hear a hammer in the fog, and after that, the road did the rest. 31 tigers, 3 nights, and somewhere in the dark, a hammer struck metal once.